Support for this episode comes from TVNU, Building Justice. For recent high school grads, the TVNU Gap Year offers hands-on internships for social change, adventures in the stunning Pacific Northwest, and friendships that last a lifetime. Participants build a vibrant and inclusive Jewish home together in Portland, Oregon. Gain confidence, make an impact, and discover your voice before even stepping onto a college campus. Robust financial aid is available. Apply now at tivnu.org. Email Miriam Grossman at miriam@tvnu.org to learn more.
This is Judaism Unbound, episode 477, Israel-Palestine, Ve'ahavta, You Will Love. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And today, we're continuing our series of episodes exploring American Jewish discourse about Israel-Palestine. Our guest, Amichai Lau-Lavie, is a familiar one to those of you who are longtime listeners of Judaism Unbound because he's joined us quite a few times in the past in episodes 29, 219, and 381. He's the co-founder and spiritual leader of Lab Shul, which describes itself as an artist-driven, everybody-friendly, God-optional, pop-up, experimental community for sacred Jewish gatherings based in New York City. Amichai Lau-Lavie is also a movie star, since he's the subject of a recently released documentary about his life and work called Sabbath Queen, which, if you have the opportunity, you should run out and see immediately. Importantly for this conversation, Amichai Lau-Lavie has also become a leading voice calling for compassion toward Israelis and Palestinians. Through Lab Shul, he's helped shepherd a variety of opportunities for courageous conversation, spiritual care, political reflection, activism, support, and ritual healing. Before we dive into this conversation, we're excited to announce that we're just now opening registration for 3-week mini-courses in our Unyeshiva, Judaism Unbound's digital center for Jewish learning and unlearning. I know we've been talking about our 8-week courses lately, but if you heard about those and thought, that's a bit too long for me, these 3-week options that'll begin just after Passover should be perfect. The first block of mini-courses will include a class called Jewish Theology Unbound, Seeing God in Ourselves, taught by Sophia Freudenstein, and a class called Untangling Tselem Elohim, that's God's Image, taught by Raphael Nice. And our very own Lex Rofberg and Emma Newberry will be teaching a class called Moses, Tzipora, and Us, Powerful Interfaith Families, Past and Present. Financial aid is available for any of these classes, and you can learn more about all of them by heading to judaismunbound.com/classes. And now just a little bit more about our guest today, Amichai Lau-Lavie. He is the co-founding spiritual leader of the Lab Shul community in New York City and the creator of the ritual theater company Storytelling. Born in Israel, he's been living in New York since 1998. He received rabbinical ordination in 2016, becoming part of the 39th generation of rabbis in his family, and the first one to be openly queer. Amichai Lau-Lavie is the star of Sabbath Queen, Sandy Dubowski's award-winning documentary film, which premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival in June 2024 and is currently touring to theaters and film festivals all around the world. And it gives us a rare opportunity to watch a human being grow and change and also grapple with both the legacy of his family and the members of his family. Amichai Lau-Lavie serves on the executive board of Rabbis for Human Rights, is a co-founding member of the Jewish Emergent Network, and a founding faculty member of the Reboot Network. He serves on the advisory board of the Sulha Peace Project for Israeli and Palestinian peacemakers, the Leadership Council of the New York Jewish Agenda, the Advisory Council for the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, and as an advisor to Jerusalem Open House for Pride and Tolerance. He has rabbinic ordination from the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. Amichai Lau-Lavie has received many accolades, including being named an iconoclastic mystic by Time Out New York, a calm voice for peace by NPR, a rock star by the New York Times, a maverick spiritual leader by the Times of Israel, and one of the most interesting thinkers in the Jewish world by the Jewish Week. In 2022, Amichai Lau-Lavie began publishing Below the Bible Belt, a daily digital project extended over 42 months, critically queering and rereading all 929 chapters of the Hebrew Bible. So let's jump into this conversation. Amichai Lau-Lavie, welcome back to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you again.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Lex. I'm glad to be with you in conversation. Good to be back.
In the last year or so, I've heard you use this phrase, all you need is Vav. And Vav is a letter in the Hebrew alphabet that is used essentially the way that we use the word and in English. And you've talked about this idea of the forgotten and. And I'm wondering, when we discuss not so much what's happening in Israel-Palestine, but what is happening here based on what is happening there, it feels like there's a tearing in the community, right? A sense, I think, that both sides, and I use that term cautiously because I don't want it to be sides, but both inclinations tend to see the folks that are primarily talking about the other one as acting in some way a form of betrayal or a form of horror. It's very hard to have any kind of discourse when that's how it's framed. And I'm wondering if you could share with us a little bit how your all you need is Vav orientation provides another option.
This is such a great way to begin. The word ve'ahavta, and you will love, which is where this Vav comes from, is really the central word in the Torah. In the heart of our sacred tradition is already the knowledge that we will be polarized, that we will forget to love, that we will be torn by trauma in ways that will diminish the divinity we see in each other. And so our ancient ancestors, whoever wrote the Torah, placed that verse, "V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha," and you will love the other as you love yourself, smack in the middle of the Torah. There's research that shows that if you look at the 5 books of Moses, the third one is Vayikra. In the middle of the third one is this verse. So from so many levels, we have been reminded that this will happen. We forget to love. And so the Vav is, what does it feel like to expand my circle of empathy? What does it feel like to not just love the people I already know and love who share my space and opinions and values, but also expand my sense of empathy to people who do not share my exact values? So this Vav, this hook, right? Vav is a hook in Hebrew. And in the Yemenite...
Just to be clear about that, the word Vav can be a letter that means and, but it also literally means a hook.
And it looks like one in a
and it
little
looks
bit
like
of a
hook,
sense.
right? This is ancient Semitic knowledge in action. The word Vav is a Vav Chibur. It's the Vav that connects. It could also be Vav Hipuch, the Vav that flips back. In the Yemenite pronunciation of the letter Vav, you say wow. So I've been using the term all you need is Vav, all we need is to expand our sense of empathy, but also saying all you need is wow. There's some sense of awe that we diminish, we forget when we get into a news cycle mentality of rage, and our loyalties become very narrow. And the Vav says, what does it mean to love my people and other people? What does it mean to feel a little wider? Those are lofty words, but this past year and a half of so much agony and so much sorrow, that's been, for me and for many others, a hook into not being completely lost in despair and doing what we can to show up as much as possible.
I'm wondering if maybe you could share with us a little bit of your own journey since October 7th, of feelings and also actions through that time, because I've watched you from afar and with great admiration, and I've said, wow, if everybody would be responding the way that you have been, that's the world that I would want to live in. And I'm wondering if you could talk about the emotional experience of how you navigated those days.
Thank you, first of all, for saying that, Dan. That means a lot. I respect and appreciate you so much. And you and Lex have taken such a stand in creating these conversations wisely and sensitively. Been very helpful to me. So it's good to be in conversation with you both. You actually threw me to another moment that I want to share before I speak about October 7th. I want to go back to November 5th, 1995, which was the day after Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a Jewish supremacist terrorist. And I was living in Israel as an Israeli. That's where I grew up. And at the time I was living in Jerusalem, the night of Rabin's assassination was, of course, a horrific shock. I was in my mid-20s, and I lived on this rooftop apartment in the middle of Jerusalem from where I could see mountains of memorial altars and candles and prayer. And I took a can of paint and on my balcony wrote in big gray letters the word Ve'ahavta, and you will love, so that anybody walking up Ben Yehuda Street in the middle of Jerusalem could see it. That was my little prayerful protest back then. But I'm just saying so because October 7th is a horrific day that none of us will forget. It's in the history books of horror, and it's sitting on so many other horror days. The situation between the children of Abraham has deteriorated to such horrific hostility. So when I got up at 4 a.m. on October 7th, because I went to the bathroom and I saw that my phone was buzzing, within 5 minutes understood that actually something very, very big is already going on. And sitting right where I'm sitting now at my desk, where I have a photo of my grandfather, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Lau, who was a rabbi in Poland and led his congregation to the gas in 1942 in Treblinka. And next to him, I have a photo of an old Arabic woman whose name I don't know, with a basket on her head next to a traffic sign that says slow in Hebrew, Arabic, and English. This is in Jerusalem in 1968. I sat at this desk and thought and felt this is changing everything. And I have to be very deliberate and very cautious in how I am helpful as an Israeli American, as a son of Holocaust survivors, as a rabbi, as a father, as a human being with deep ties to my Israeli family, to the Jewish story, with deep friendships with Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank, here in the United States, and as a peacemaker who believes deeply that the horrors of these last many decades are just a chapter in a much longer book, and that we inherited a book with multiple responses to the human dilemma, some of them toxic, trauma-inducing, binary, triumphalist, racist, unhelpful, but some of them, like Ve'ahavta, essential tools in reconstruction and repair and in hope in humanity. So my first inclination on that morning was just to be in solidarity with the sorrow and to begin reminding people that we do have tools of resilience at our disposal, and to find a way to be in the messy middle, in the both and. Now, that is a popular view in some circles and a very unpopular view in many other circles that demand one-sided loyalty. Many moments this past year both weakened and strengthened my total belief that this is the only way forward. It begins by being committed to each other's humanity.
I want to invoke one of my favorite teachings. It's kind of a visual, mystical teaching of Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, who he teaches about the notion of B'Tselem Elohim Baranu, the notion that all human beings, not just Jews, all human beings are created in the image of God. He takes that literally, and he hears the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey of God's most common four-letter name, and he takes the Yud as like the head, like he takes each letter visually. So maybe in the show notes we'll put the images of each of these letters so people know what I'm getting at. But the Yud is shaped kind of like a head. The Hey is sort of our arms hanging downward. The Vav is our torso, our body. And then the last Hey is our legs. And so you're teaching on Vav as connective tissue, as and. In that teaching of Zalman's is totally, completely, almost metaphysically true, because it is serving that torso role of connecting our arms and our legs and sort of providing the ability of all of us to even be kind of bodies walking around. And what I also want to sit with Ve'ahavta, it didn't have a direct object. It didn't have a particular noun that you were directing people to love. Usually, like when I hear ve'ahavta in Jewish context, it is almost always followed by another word. So sometimes ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, like love God. Other times, ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor, love the other as yourself. Other times, ve'ahavta et hager, love the stranger. It's usually a specific direction of love. But what you're channeling by saying the key is actually not loving one particular object in one particular direction, one particular target of love. It's to channel love generally. Ve'ahavta. Ve'ahavta. I'd love to hear more from you about that. I mean, that's the hard part, right? Like, how can we hold that teaching, that notion of ve'ahavta, without always having to specify, well, love your fellow Jews or love specifically Palestine? Like, how do we navigate without focusing on the direct objects?
What comes to me from what you're beautifully naming in the name of our Rebbe, Reb Zalman, of blessed memory, is that the big theological notions of what the divine is are parallel to the simple fact that we all know that you see each other, you see the love, you see the divine, you see the spark of life inside the eyes of the other with whom you sit for a couple of moments face to face to see each other. Sitting with someone else face to face, eye to eye, is to see the divinity in each other, including the capital O, other. One of the lessons I learned, or one of the decisions I took earlier this horrible time, was to strengthen my commitment to sit with people that I don't necessarily agree with, and the ones with whom I do agree, and just sit together and be witness to each other's pain and hopes and be in presence with each other. I've traveled 12 times back and forth to Israel and Palestine since October 7th. But I went back and forth starting the very middle of October because I wanted to sit with and be in solidarity with my people. And that meant sitting with my cousins who lost a son, a soldier, during the first days in Gaza, and sitting with their pain. We do not share the same political opinions. And then I went to sit with a Palestinian friend of mine in Haifa, daughter of a family who survived the Nakba, and sat with her for a few hours. And we ate together and we drank together and we heard each other, holding each other's hand, like you're talking about the divine in the body, watching each other's gestures, eating each other's food. Now, there are many such initiatives. Baruch Hashem, Alhamdulillah, thank Goddess and all beings, of people who see each other's divinity and humanity despite the differences. I've sat with friends here in the United States who are dear friends and are anti-Zionist, both people who are Jewish and people who are of other faiths, with the explicit aim of let's sit down, let's use all the active listening skills we have, let's hold each other's hearts and agree to disagree, but let's use words. Tell me why. Tell me what. Tell me what you're feeling. Tell me what you're thinking. We are the people who inherited the power of words to help us untangle some of this pain. Unfortunately, so often we use the words as weapons, but we can also, if the words are mines and landmines, we also have the ways to dismantle landmines. That's what's been meaningful to me, to try and do that. And also just, social media, the urge to comment, to react, to immediately respond to the fast pace on a platform in a context that really doesn't handle nuance very well. So my recommendation is for us to reach out to someone with whom we don't necessarily agree and take the time to unpack what we're feeling. Personally, this has been very helpful to me. And at Lab Shul, my community here in New York, really since the beginning of this whole nightmare, we've constantly created and curated and co-created these opportunities for deep listening without necessarily coming out the other end with an agreement. There's so much we do agree on, and then let's figure out where we don't and honor that as well. We have a culture of conflict that we've inherited from the ancient sages. And this is another tool of resilience that is very needed right now.
Yeah. I'd love to hear more about what you describe with Lab Shul. I mean, we've had you on the show before and spoke in more detail about Lab Shul, the community, about some of your wonderful hyphenated self descriptors like God optional and everybody friendly. I think the everybody friendly one is really hard. And I think in a moment like this, especially hard. And I also genuinely, in looking at your website, I mean, I haven't been blessed to attend any of the programs myself. I've been very impressed with what it appears you're taking on at LabShul, and I'd love to hear more about it and for our listeners to hear more about it. What I mean by that, I mean, there's a few questions or tensions that arise in terms of Jewish institutions responding to this moment. And I think so often the questions that are asked are like, what statement should we issue? Or where should we position ourselves? Like those kinds of questions. And what I find less often is how do we just create space for people to process? That there is some of that. I don't want to pretend that that's not happening at all. I saw on your website you have this Courageous Conversations initiative. It reminds me of when I was living in Jackson, Mississippi, a very red area of the country. The synagogue I was part of, we organized what we called at the time an Israel or Israel-Palestine literacy series. And the goal was just to get people in a room and learn together, like build up our understanding of what's going on, but not actually end it with like, and here's where the congregation as a whole is going to stand. But I think what you've done, which, I mean, maybe there have been statements that LabShul's done too, I don't know. But like what your main focus seems to have been is something else. And I'd love to hear just to some degree, what are some of the specific kinds of programs you've pulled together? And why have you made those choices in a world where you could make all sorts of other programmatic or ideological kinds of choices?
I am very blessed and fortunate to be working with an incredible team at LabShul, both the immediate team and the people in our inner circle, board and lead volunteers. One of the taglines for LabShul is God optional, and we get a lot of flack for that. And the other ways of saying that is God fluid or BYOG, knowing that people differ on a lot of things, including the three of us. By saying God optional, we say, welcome whatever your version of the big mystery called life is all about. It has many names, nicknames, definitions. And somehow we managed to agree on that. And our liturgy and our programs are open to different people's interpretation of the sacred. In the same way, certainly since October 7th, we have taken the time to ask some of those questions about some of those words. And our sense of commitment to being a brave and safe space. So from the very beginning, the stance that I've stood for and the one that the LabShul community together stands on is that we are committed to peace. We are committed to the peace, justice, dignity, and freedom of the Israeli people and the Palestinian people. We abhor violence. We condemn terror, right? Nobody is going to disagree on that. But I just want to say that it's not been easy. There are people on my team who consider themselves non-Zionist. I myself struggle with the Zionist as is. Is it liberal Zionist, progressive Zionist, re-Zionist, reimagined Zionist? I'm also the problem child here because I am an Israeli American and I bring a perspective that might be different for other American Jews. I had 15 nephews and nieces in uniform on active duty, leaving their families behind to defend the family and home through many, many of these months in Gaza and Lebanon. As we speak today, mid-February, we don't know if there's going to be another round of fighting. The way things go with the kind of leadership we have and the attitudes of fear-based hostility that have taken over so much of this discourse, sadly, there likely will be. And how do we not keep our eyes off the prize, which is a process of reconciliation and repair, but must happen. There is no other future. So for us, for LabShul, the decision was to, first of all, craft statements that speak the both and in a respectful way that stands in solidarity with our Israeli friends and family and stands in solidarity with the sorrow and pains of the Palestinian people. So our statements and our programs reflect this wish. This past season of High Holy Days, we invited several Palestinian and Israeli peacemakers to join us live in New York and online. We had a group of Palestinian and Israeli women who've all lost people to the conflict and who traveled together throughout the world to speak for the vision of peace. People and organizations who are still at it, refusing to let go of each other's hand. As we speak right now, the Lapshul community meets monthly for courageous conversations facilitated by very talented people in our community who know conflict resolution and invite the community to come and sit and talk and listen. And we do have a diversity. We have people who are angry at me and some who have left or are coming back and forth, but some who have absolutely left, who feel that we're not pro-Israel enough. That even though I pray and we speak of the hostages and we celebrate their release, we should not be also celebrating the fact that Palestinians are going home. We have people who are furious at me for not calling out genocide back in December of last year and not taking an avowed anti-Zionist stance. And so we invite those people too to sit in conversation with us, in courageous conversation, and hear each other's hurt, but agree on the fact that what is happening is horrible and we must find a way out.
So I read a book last week, and there's one line that's really been sticking with me. It's the book by Geraldine Brooks called Memorial Days. It's about the death of her husband, the author Tony Horwitz. But actually, the line that sticks with me doesn't really have so much to do with that, but it's that she went to this island off the coast of Australia to recover from the sudden death, and she was talking about a story of I think like the wife of a British colonizer governor on that island or whatever, and she had kind of adopted this indigenous child. It doesn't really matter so much what the story was, but she ended up giving back the indigenous child to the orphanage and leaving and going back to England. And Geraldine Brooks said she was planning to write a novel about this woman. Once she heard that story, she couldn't write that novel anymore, that historical novel about this woman, because she could not understand the story that she would have told herself, that she must have told herself, about why it was okay to return this child back to the orphanage. And she said, if I can't understand the story that a character is telling themselves about why their actions are okay, then I can't write that novel. I can't tell that person's story. And it struck me that that was kind of at the heart of a lot of what's going on in Israel-Palestine themselves, I mean, between Israelis and Palestinians, but also among the people here in the United States or elsewhere in the world that are identifying with one side versus the other primarily. And it seems to me that often they are simply unable to describe what the story must be that the other person is telling to themselves about why they're doing it, and instead they ascribe to them essentially evil. And I guess I'm wondering about Judaism in this story, because from my sense, and I'm wondering about you as a rabbi, and I'm wondering about Lapshul as a Jewish community, as a model perhaps for what Judaism might say about all this more broadly, which I think I've always experienced Judaism to say, it's about what you do, not about what you think. Not that it's not at all about what you think, but that ultimately it's about what you do, and says like, yeah, I understand the desire for revenge. Don't do it. I understand the desire to strike or kill somebody who has wronged you deeply. Don't do it. As opposed to saying, don't have those feelings. And I'm just wondering if perhaps there's an opening here to reimagine the role of Judaism as a way of saying, we understand the impulse and ultimately there is a different choice to be made. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I want to talk about the ancient Hebrew tradition, the Ivri, the boundary crosser. Before we were Yehudim, Jewish, Judean, we were Ivrim, Hebrews. To be an Ivri, as Ibrahim was, is to be someone who is over, me'ever le'ever, someone who's a boundary crosser, going from one side of the river to the other side of the river, from one place to the other. not just geographically, as nomads do, but conceptually, spiritually, intellectually. To be a nomad as opposed to a settler is somebody who has a wider expanse of belonging. I'm saying that because underneath our Judean, Jewish, historical layers of identity that are geographical and political and very specific, there is the Hebraic spring that is still flowing, that is teaching us to be more flexible, expansive, perhaps loving, resilient in our sense of self, this Ivriyut, this Hebrewness that has a way to transcend the trauma of the thousands of years of exile and horror that we've endured. That is part of the magic of the return to the land, of the return to the language. Right now, it's coming with a cost of some of the worst territorial and toxic elements. But we know it also includes the prophetic visions and the highest values of human dignity and coexistence and shared faith. That all sounds very Hegelian and lofty. It is, but it's rooted in the very basic practices of how we live our lives. So you brought Geraldine Brooks. I'll counter you with a quote from Tom Robbins, who just passed away, the great mythologist. I loved his writings. He woke me up to myth. He wrote, "We are our own dragons as well as our own heroes, and we have to rescue ourselves from ourselves." We are our own dragons and we are our own heroes. And if we forget that inside of us is the micro drama of the macro cosmos, then we don't take responsibility for our own shadows, for our own collective and personal stuff that we must reckon with. When someone sits with me, and I have these conversations, steadfast on what was is what will be, they will never change. That's how it always is. I mean, I have compassion there and I understand it, but sometimes it's hard to have conversations. We all know that, with people who are completely committed to perpetuate what they know and are not open even a little bit to hear that there is a possible path, a bird's eye view, another perspective that opens up a possibility of healing. Those conversations are harder. And I bless the ones amongst us who have the patience to be in that deep level of conflict resolution, especially in leadership positions, because that is the only way forward.
So, in terms of courageous conversations and finding moments to speak across difference, often it's very hard. I mean, I admire the heck out of people like you who set up the time in their lives and find the people to have many of those kinds of one-on-ones or small group conversations. But one thing I always want to notice is, what are the moments in our calendar, our Jewish calendar, where already we're likely or possibly going to be in rooms where conversations across difference can happen. And I look at our calendar right now as this episode is released, and I notice Passover's coming up. The Passover Seder of the entire Jewish calendar year might be the most, or one of the most, ideal opportunities to engage with this set of issues. Now, I will grant that stereotypically lots of Passover Seders either erupt in disagreement or get rushed for the sake of getting to the meal. But this is a story of the Jewish collective, that is actually not only about Jews. I always like to remind people, like the Torah portion that we receive the Ten Commandments after this story, it's named after a Midianite guy, Yitro. And there are many characters in this journey and a mixed multitude in this story. And of course, moments in the Seder where we notice our relationship to those who are not Jewish and to the Egyptians specifically. But this is like a programmatic, for lack of a better term, moment in many of our lives where we're likely to be at a table with people who are not necessarily on the same page as us. And I'm wondering how we might channel some of the Ve'ahavta in those moments. What might it look like in a Seder context to sit with the pain of Israelis, to sit with the pain of Palestinians, to do so in conversation with our ancient tradition and with our present moment? And as one proposal that just came to me now, and then I'd love to hear your proposals, The Seder famously ends with the phrase L'shana haba'ah b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. And because of the nature of our conversation about love and ve'ahavta, I noticed that the word haba'ah, the four letters of it, Hey, Bet, Aleph, and Hey, can be reordered to say ahava, which is love. I mean, this is not that big of a move. Like Hasidically, it's very common to sort of manipulate letters in words. And you could easily read this closing statement as L'shana ahava b'Yerushalayim, sort of here's to a year of love in Jerusalem, in a city that is often translated city of completion or city of completeness. So that's one idea that just came to me now that I think could inflect our Seders with deeper conversations and with more love. I'm curious if you have some, either that you've sort of done in the past or that are coming to you in this moment.
I love your rereading of Haba'ah as Ahava, and I'm going to borrow it. Thank you. Amen. Amen. So as we speak together with the Lab Shul community and with Reboot, we've launched our pre-Passover series of how to prep for a complicated Seder with 4 new questions. And our version is called Seder, Sayder, read less, say more. We're basically reframing the 4 questions of the Seder as less of the Haggadah reading Seder and more of the big questions asking Seder. And the 4 questions begin with Ma nishtana, what's new? Start the Seder by going around and asking each other, how am I different? What have I learned? How am I not the same as I was last year? Or other ways of asking that question as we frame this theatrical dinner party, this what Anita Diamond calls an exercise in collective optimism, as a place of meaning making and healing, where I know it's often very complicated. Those 4 new questions are available as a PDF and as a do-it-yourself guide. The sessions on Zoom are recorded, and we're excited this year to ask big questions, from what is new to what will it be. The last question of the 4, I won't give all 4 away, is L'shana haba'ah. What does a year from now look like? Be a visionary. What do you want? What do you commit to for a world freer of injustice, more open to liberation, walking our talk? So there's a lot about the political imagination that we invite people into, to be visionaries, to open their door to the Elijah, which means prophetic unknown, goes beyond the pain of here and now, to end the Seder with an optimistic call to visions of wholeness and peace in Jerusalem and beyond. It's a beautiful tool we inherited as well, not to just be in the despair. We are in the narrow places. We are in the Exodus. We're always moving from the narrow to the wide, as spirals do. But to end the Seder with is a collective call for vision. You're reminding me of an experiment I did at a Passover Seder 20 years ago in some apartment in Manhattan with about 50 different people of different faiths. At some point, when it came to the Magid, to the telling of the story, I divided the room into 2 and asked people to go spend about 15 minutes in 2 groups. One group was to retell the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, of the Exodus, from the point of view of the Hebrews. The other was to tell the point of view of the Egyptians, and then come back together and share a 3-minute skit. These were adults and teens and kids. It was chaotic, but very profound. It immediately became a conversation about Israelis and Palestinians. And the Exodus story became a platform for, wow, how we look at the same thing from very different eyes. But I do think the Seder calls on us for creative pedagogies that enable us not to recycle the Haggadah that was never meant to be read cover to cover. It is an anthology. And may I use this platform to remind people that whoever leads a Seder and whoever is around the table, be a thoughtful curator of content. Prep and edit and choose highlights that make grandma happy and make your neighbor or your work buddy curious and feeling welcomed. And we are asked to choose wisely which of the vast content of the Haggadah we bring to the table. Less is more. I'm hoping to be spending this Passover Seder on the shores of the Dead Sea at an Israeli-Palestinian Seder that I'm organizing in an area that's easy enough for some Palestinians to come to, and for Israelis who want to spend the Seder as a reminder of our commitment to liberation, that none of us free until all of us are free. Not just to recycle the old story of this is our victim and liberation story. What does that mean for us as a responsibility? I'm breaking my mother's heart by not sitting at her Seder table in Jerusalem. She understands.
Maybe you could introduce her to the American tradition of the second Seder.
You know, Israelis are not big on second Seder. When I was a kid and we lived there, my uncle from England used to come and take a big room at the King David and do second Seder. And we came as the Israelis just to kind of check out the food and turn on the lights. But I don't know. I actually suspect there will be a few different Sdarim this year committed to different themes of solidarity and liberation, both here and everywhere. I want to say that like the Ve'ahavta and like Shabbat and like the many tools of resilience and resistance we've inherited from our ancestors, exactly for times such as these, the Seder is an important opportunity for storytelling that honor our past and craft a new path forward. And to just be stuck to the old text is ignorant, right? We need to be a little more literate and thoughtful and craft our own Seder of meaning making. Can we activate these Passover procedures, which is what Seder means, as recipes for repair?
On the subject of storytelling, and as we get towards the end of our conversation today, I'm just thinking a lot about the film that recently came out about your life. I mean, I'm sure that I'm not the only one, and probably you're the main one that wondered if this film would ever come out, because it has literally been filmed for like 20 years.
Come out's a great word for this context, Dan.
Yeah. I mean, I enjoyed the film on all kinds of levels. There's so much amazing stuff. I mean, like, what struck me about the film is how you have been a person who is dogged in terms of making certain kinds of changes. And one of the ways that the film works is that it interviews your brother a lot, Benny Lau, who is a Orthodox rabbi in Israel, as someone who often in the conversation says you've gone too far. And so you're not a person who is, I mean, you talk about the messy middle, but you're not a person in the middle. You're a person who, on certain topics that you care about, has pushed in certain directions and who has been very effective. And I think that what I want to explore here is that when we're talking about Israel-Palestine, there tends to be a sense that if you're not this kind of loud and angry and accusatory voice, then you're not saying enough. And that if you express sympathy or empathy for the other side, people will be very, very angry at you. That somehow the people, I think, who are thinking that way are saying, we won't make progress in the direction that we want unless we are sort of dogged and one-sided in that way. And so something is going to happen that is not the fantasy of either side or their allies and advocates. And yet, it's not necessarily a compromise. It's not necessarily a messy middle. You can be an advocate for one resolution or another, whether that's two states or one state or Zionism, anti-Zionism, whatever it is. It feels like there's a way to advocate for these positions that is filled with love and also realism. And I'm wondering if you might chart a course for what that could actually look like, maybe based on the things that you've advocated for in terms of the role of LGBT folks in the Jewish community and how much that has changed, and other things that the film talks about. I'm wondering whether there's something to be learned here about this issue.
Okay, a couple of things. First of all, Sabbath Queen, the film that Sandy Dubowski has worked on for 21 years and is now championing worldwide, tells my story of decision to come out. Or rather, I was outed, but to like really embrace my queer identity, to find my Jewish journey, to move from a theater maker, an artist, and a drag queen to become a rabbi, and to find the messy middle where I insist we can meet each other. And I'm pleased because I'm a storyteller and Sandy is a storyteller, and we are both in the service of a bigger story that is the paradigm shift of this moment, from the ability to be an openly gay rabbi in a world where several decades ago that was not an option, And there are many people in the world today who would rather that is not an option. To be involved with a queer family with a lot of flexibility around what family means. And again, there are many who would prefer that family values is something else. And as somebody who stands between the different camps as an Israeli American peace activist, and as the film ends right after October 7th, me saying I stand with the pain of both my family and my Palestinian neighbors. So the film does all that. And it also talks about my Joy proposal from 2017 that finds ways to bring Jews and people who are not Jews together in marriage and in love and honor the different paths that create a fluid fusion of identities in a world that is longing to be less binary and more inclusive. All that's in the film, and it came out after October 7th, and therefore it serves as a jumping point for some real big conversations, and that is the role of art. Art gets us to feel and to respond in ways that maybe other discourses don't, because it's just the brain. This is also heart. And in the Q&As that we've had throughout the United States, in Europe, in Israel, people have responded to the themes in the film in very powerful ways. I'm not compromising on the messy middle. It's still the place where we meet. I'm also not compromising on saying this is who I am and this is what I believe in, and I'm not going to change my mind. I'm going to get theological for a moment. There's a concept in the Jewish mythic imagination that is called Kodesh HaKodeshim, the Holy of Holies. There was a location, a very small room in our ancient history, where there was a temple in Jerusalem, which was all holy, and inside was the black box, the little chamber where the high priest would go in only once a year, on the holiest day of the year, to reignite the sacred. That is the Holy of Holies. It was off limits to all humans, except for one moment. Inside that Holy of Holies, where there was the box containing our wisdom, the ark, before Indiana Jones stole it. And on top of it were the two cherubim, the cherubim, those two creatures made of gold, will look each other eye to eye, panim el panim. In between the eyes of those two creatures, the divine dwells. The Shekhinah, the divine presence, is there when we look each other in the eye. Intimacy is at the heart of the Jewish story. The temple was destroyed, and there is no Holy of Holies. There's no ark. There are no cherubim. But the Song of Songs is the Holy of Holies, and that is a biblical poem about intimacy and the yearning for intimacy.
And sorry, when you say that, you're quoting Rebbe Akiva, the famous teaching.
Yes. I'm quoting a Talmudic teaching of a problematic sage who nevertheless said the entire Bible is holy, and the Song of Songs, the song of love and intimacy, is the Holy of Holies. Intimacy, seeing each other eye to eye, looking ourselves in the eye. That is our Holy of Holies. That is our bullseye within our culture, within our collective consciousness that calls on us, and that includes conflict resolution in the most micro and macro ways. That is what I think it means, Heyu Kedoshim, be a sacred people, which incidentally is my bar mitzvah portion, and it includes the words, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love each other as you love yourself. They also include the words, execute homosexuals. We got to look back at our tradition with critical eyes and with loving eyes, eye to eye with what we inherited and who we are, and lean into love.
Thank you so much, Amichai Lau-Lavie, for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you for this dose of healing and hope in the middle of such difficult days. It's really a privilege and an honor. Thank you.
And thanks so much to all of you out there for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and we hope that you'll tune in again in the future. We have a couple announcements as we close. As mentioned at the top, we have our mini courses in the Yeshiva that are open right now. 3 amazing classes that if you listen to this and you're like, I really want to actualize this and spend some time learning and unlearning and diving into ways that our Judaism can help heal the world, these classes provide those outlets. There are 3 options open right now at judaismunbound.com/classes. Financial aid is available for all of them. Another shout out is that we have many Passover resources, JudaismUnbound.com/Passover, and you can check out things we've made in past years that you can incorporate into a Seder, some new things that we're creating right now that will be appearing between now and Passover. Lots of great stuff there, and we hope that you will utilize them in your Seders and throughout the rest of Passover as well. Also, we want to encourage you, as always, to be in touch with us, and there are a wide variety of ways for you to do that. First, you can head to our Facebook or Instagram handles. Both of those are at Judaism Unbound. You can email us at dan@JudaismUnbound.com or lex@JudaismUnbound.com. And we're always grateful if you are interested in supporting us financially on either a monthly recurring basis or just via a one-time gift at JudaismUnbound.com/donate. So thank you so much for listening, and with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.